been teaching nutrition, assisting patients, and counseling individuals for 20 years. She has directed both a cardiac rehab and an osteoporosis program, and is currently teaching a cutting-edge diabetic wellness program that has helped individuals lose weight, reduce or eliminate medications, and return blood sugars to healthy levels. Lynn combines her experience in cooking, nutrition, and wellness coaching to create a fun and informative class. Please help me give Lynn a warm welcome.
Well, hopefully I have my school teacher voice on tonight. If you can't hear me, just let me know, because we don't have a mic. But as she said, my name is Lynn, and I've been working in wellness for 20 years. My background is exercise physiology. My first degree was in nutrition and home economics, and so I like to combine my knowledge and passion of nutrition, my knowledge of exercise, and then just the practical health aspects. And boy, things have changed over the years, and it isn't the same type of things that we learned back when I went to school. So nutrition is an ongoing, cutting-edge science, and there's a lot of new and great information out there, and I hope to present some of that to you tonight. I'm also, as she said, a provider for a diabetes program, and I'm going to incorporate a little bit of our success stories and a little bit of what we've learned through this program, as well with this basic overall diabetes presentation. Diabetes, unfortunately, is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. We don't talk about it enough. And oftentimes our practitioners, we don't have enough time to spend with our patients, and we don't maybe given the information that says, you know what, if you really turned your lifestyle around, and your diet around, and your exercise around, you could turn this train around, and you wouldn't have to go down this diabetes road. Currently, we know that if you just open the paper or turn on the TV, diabetes is a huge disease, and currently there's about 33 million diabetics in the United States and about 80 million pre-diabetics. So if you look at that 80 million number, you know that we are going to end up with a big problem in a short amount of time. Half of Americans could face diabetes by the year 2020. When they're saying half, they mean either pre-diabetes or diabetes, and that's a lot of folks. And that number, 3.35 trillion, is going to make a huge impact on our healthcare system. And one of the newest articles that I've read here just came out last week is it looked at the cost of diabetes from 2007 to 2012. And it has jumped from, I don't know if you can read that number on the gorilla's face, 174 billion to 245 billion in 5 years. So that's about 70 billion it's increased. And to me, those numbers are just unfathomable. What our statistics are kind of looking like, and our blue doesn't show up here in the midline, but this chart was from the CDC, started in 1980 and goes to 2008. And if you'll notice, it kind of goes along pretty gradually in 1980 to about 1995, 1996, and then it starts to take a big upward turn. And the biggest group, as you can see, is and all of them increased in proportion, but our biggest one is that blue group at the bottom, and that's our 45 to 64-year-olds. So that population has increased tremendously. And we know, of course, that over 65, about 1 in 2 end up with diabetes. So when we take a look at that, we go, wow, we've got a big population there that needs some help. What are some factors, sorry that kind of blends out, because it doesn't look that way on my screen, of type 2 diabetes? Well, the first risk factor for type 2 diabetes is impaired glucose tolerance, or we often term it pre-diabetes. And I don't know if have any of your doctors ever said, you might have some impaired glucose tolerance, or you might have pre-diabetes? Yeah, okay. So that's a big factor for type 2. And we'll talk more about how that all plays into diabetes. Weight is another risk factor for type 2 diabetes. Inactivity, not getting enough exercise. Back to our weight. We measure weight, and I'm not a big fan of the BMI, but it is widely used, especially to categorize individuals who are at high risk. So if you know what your BMI is, and I have a little chart if you want to look afterwards, but if your weight or your BMI is about 25 to 29, it categorizes you as overweight, and that puts you at risk for diabetes. And if you're over 30, you're in that obesity category. But that weight is important because your weight directly affects that impaired glucose tolerance. Inactivity. We have become a very inactive and sedentary society, and we really have to work hard to get enough activity. Family history. If you have a genetic predisposition, if you have a parent or a sibling with type 2 diabetes, you're going to be at higher risk as well. As we age, it increases, and you'll note it from that last slide I showed you. The other ones would be race. Blacks, Hispanics, American Indians, and Asians are at a much higher risk for diabetes than even Caucasian. Has anybody been told they have had, you may not have it at this moment, gestational diabetes? Gestational diabetes is one of those things that they'll tell you if you've had it, you probably will have diabetes down the road. And that's when you have diabetes during your pregnancy or blood sugar is a little bit high during pregnancy. Polycystic ovarian syndrome, and this is kind of a new term. Some people have heard of it, some people haven't. And it's kind of a grouping of symptoms, and it affects females. There's some ovarian cyst disease. They carry more weight around the middle. It's much harder to lose weight, but their blood sugars are higher, and they become insulin resistant, and that is a big risk for diabetes as well. High blood pressure. Many people who have high blood pressure, it's their first sign that they're kind of approaching diabetes. So if you have hypertension or history of hypertension, keep an eye on your blood sugars as well. Abnormal cholesterol levels. And when we look at these, a couple things that I look for, especially when I'm helping patients, is their level of triglycerides. So if your level of triglycerides are elevated over that 150 mark, you're probably at risk. And if you're over 150, and especially quite a bit higher, and your HDLs, your good cholesterol, is low, like probably in the 30s, sometimes I find them in the 20s, that kind of profile is a much higher risk for diabetes, even if your glucose level still isn't to that level of being pre-diabetic. Here were some surprising risks, and this was just on Real Age lately, on surprising risks for diabetes. One is history of breast cancer, and I don't know if any of you have ever heard that. I took a couple quick notes because this isn't as familiar as some of the other stuff. But if women have had what they called a BRCA1 or BRCA2 type cancer, they're at a higher risk for diabetes. If they have been treated with tamoxifen, they're also at a higher risk for diabetes. If you've been given statins, possibly you may be at a higher risk for diabetes. Now, is it the statins, or is it already the metabolic disease that might be going on that has already elevated your cholesterol? I don't know, but food for thought there. Women who enter menopause at an early age, less than 40 are at higher risk for diabetes. Low vitamin D. How many of you have had your vitamin D level checked before? Less than half. Okay, for the rest of you, half. I recommend that you try to get that done this year. It's an easy test. Whenever you get your blood done, your cholesterol done, ask your physician to do your vitamin D too. What we find is a low vitamin D is pretty prevalent in this area. Most people, I'll say, probably are low if they're not supplemented. And what we know is that if you have a low vitamin D level, your risk of having high blood sugars is much higher. The other thing is, low vitamin D is associated with several other diseases, colon cancer, MS, there's quite possibly breast cancer. So knowing what your vitamin D is and making sure you're getting enough vitamin D is really important for disease prevention. Maternal diet, and this was a fun one that I just read about. If your mother did not have a very good diet the first term in her pregnancy and probably didn't eat very well, you were at a much higher risk for diabetes. Which I thought, And it looked to add insulin resistance and blood sugar levels. Sleep apnea. And I don't know if any of you have sleep apnea or have been through any of the testing, but that in itself will put you at higher risk. And it does have to do with part of that whole metabolic thing, sleeping, maybe not getting enough oxygen, but it is, if you know it, make sure you use your machines and are getting enough oxygen when you sleep. Sleep apnea also puts you at a higher risk for stroke too. The time clock, and this was kind of an interesting one. If you are a night person, whether you go to bed late, kind of get up late, that type of thing, you're about 2.5% or 2.5 times higher risk of getting diabetes. Or if you're a shift worker and work at night, into maybe more natural moisturizers or soaps. Phthalates are contained in fingernail polish, hairsprays, moisturizers, soaps, lotions, things like that. So that type of exposure over time puts us at a higher risk for diabetes. So I told my girls today, no more fingernail polish. You're done. Some of the symptoms, how do I know if I happen to be experiencing a symptom that might lead to diabetes? Some of these might be a type 1, but also a type 2 type symptom. Frequent urination, unusual thirst, extreme hunger. You might be really hungry, you can't get full. Unusual weight loss. And I know I had a cousin who all of a sudden, was, oh wow, my diet really must be working, or lack of, because I just lost 20 pounds. Wonder what's going on. Diabetes. And his blood sugars were, several hundred. So that's a sign that usually something's not going well. Extreme fatigue and irritability, frequent infections, if you have an infection that won't heal up, blurred vision. I had one person that said, I didn't even know I had diabetes until I went to the eye doctor. And then all of a sudden they're like, wow, have you had your blood sugars checked? Because of their vision issues. Cuts or bruises that are really slow to heal, tingling or numbness in the hands and feet. And that symptom right there, is typical of neuropathy. And the unfortunate part is you would think somebody would know that they had diabetes before they started feeling neuropathy, but some people don't. And then reoccurring skin, gum, or bladder infections. So those are signs that you might have some elevated blood sugars going on. So what are some of the consequences of diabetes? We all know that diabetes is a very serious disease, but I don't know that you realize how serious it is. Diabetes is the #1 cause of heart attacks, stroke, blindness, kidney failure, neuropathy, which is that tingling in your feet, and non-traumatic amputations. And one of the things that I look back on, I used to run a cardiac rehab program when I worked down at Gritman in Moscow, and probably half to 2/3 of my patients were diabetics. And they would come in, and some of these patients I had for multiple years. One guy I had he was probably in the program for 10 years because he never wanted to leave. But anyway, long story short, about half of them were diabetic, maybe 2/3 of them. And we would do their blood sugar tests. We were on them all the time to make sure they were compliant with their medications. They were exercising 2 to 3 times a week, at least with me, and often walking outside. But what I found was they were still having diabetic issues. We still had amputations. We still had, the neuropathy going on. We were still seeing strokes. We were still seeing additional heart attacks and heart disease going on. And it got me to think, you know what? Even though they were on the medications, of course their diet was, we weren't probably as diligent with that as we could have been, but we were controlling everything else. But diabetes was still progressing. And that's what made me sad. It made me go, there's got to be a better way. So that's what also led me to the program that I am teaching. Bone and joint disease. A lot of my diabetes patients have really bad bone and joint disease, and once we finally get their blood sugars down and stuff, that improves tremendously. It also helps decrease that inflammation in there. Alzheimer's disease. I don't know how many of you have read lately about the increase in Alzheimer's disease. And I don't know if, they also are saying that Alzheimer's disease might be a type of diabetes. It might be like type 3 diabetes. And what we know is that Alzheimer's diabetes usually progresses into Alzheimer's disease if you live long enough. And we know Alzheimer's disease is on the rise. I don't know about you, I'd much rather have a heart attack than Alzheimer's disease because it's scary, especially if you've had a family member with it and have gone through that whole progression of the disease. Cataracts, retinopathy, and blindness, that's another thing that diabetes will cause. But again, it's something you don't have to go down that road. And then it also can shorten our lifespan by 10 to 15 years as well. Pre-diabetes versus diabetes. This is where I find people might not have a good foundation of information. Is what is the difference between pre-diabetes and diabetes? And how do I know if I'm one or the other? Well, pre-diabetes and diabetes are identified by a couple different tests. The first one we see down here, the A1C, my fasting plasma glucose, the FPG, or the oral glucose tolerance test. Your A1C A1Cs are below 5.7. Now, if you're pre-diabetic, you're going to be in the range of 5.7 to about 6.5 or 6.4-ish cutoff right there. And then on your fasting plasma glucose, that would either be like a glucose that was done while they did your cholesterol, they did a venous draw, or it might be a finger prick, just doing a glucose meter. And normal is under 100, and pre-diabetic would be between 100 and 125. So that would be your pre-diabetic range. So if your blood sugars are running maybe 106, 110, 115, you're probably in that pre-diabetic range. Diabetes then is identified as a A1C 6.5 or above, or a glucose of 126 or above. Now my husband, you're about to go, how did you get so interested in diabetes? My husband was actually pre-diabetic, and he went to the doctor, and he wanted a knee replacement done. So he was going in, he says, I'm on a mission, I'm gonna get my knee replacement done so I can go hunting. All right, and so long story short, the doctor came back and said, well, you have pre-diabetes, we're gonna start you on metformin. And he looks at her and he goes, that stuff will kill you. And anyway, she goes, well, if you're gonna be my patient, you're gonna take this. And he goes, no, I'm not. And anyway, so it ensued for a while, and she finally gave him, I'll give you, I think it was 6 weeks to get this turned around, or we're gonna start on this medication. So after he was mad, he came home and he said, will you help me with this? And so we did, and we changed several things that he was doing. A couple of those things is, just to let you know, he was not a breakfast eater. And I don't know if you are all breakfast eaters or not, but if you aren't, become a breakfast eater. Because if you're not eating breakfast, you're eating most of your calories later in the day. And when you eat calories later in the day, it's like having that washing machine that gets off balance. And it's really hard on your metabolism. We really are designed to need to eat very frequently and consistently. Because if not, we're putting our bodies into these big shocks of lots of carbohydrates and then starvation for a while, and that type of thing. So we got him eating breakfast. We also got him eating more protein. We balanced out his calories. For dinner, he went half his plate as vegetables. That was just the quickest, easiest thing for him to do. Half your plate is vegetables, and portion control. And learning to slow down and, not have to have seconds or thirds or whatever he might have to have. So anyway, long story short, he had lost about 40 pounds. He's put a little bit more on because he's been doing some weightlifting and that type of thing. But he's been able to keep that blood sugar. His A1C was 6.3, which was pre-diabetic, and now it's been 5.1 for 2 years. So you can keep it down once you make those changes if you just continue to do, proper lifestyle thing, if your body allows that. This one is a little bit hard to read, but it's one of the handouts that I have in my program, but I thought it was so impactful because people don't tell you this. Doctors often, they don't have an opportunity to tell you a lot of this. But high blood sugar poses a big risk. And when I see some of these patients that are coming in, and they have their A1Cs at 9 or 9.5 or 10, their blood sugar's been running awful high for an awful long time. And when that happens, we put our bodies at a much higher risk for disease. So if we're running at 7.1 right there is that high zone, 7.1 and above, it puts us at a 150 to 200% increased chance of a heart attack and a stroke. It increases our chance, 40% increased chance of blindness due to retinopathy, a 30% increased chance of kidney disease, and a 50 to 70% chance of nerve damage. That's that neuropathy that's going on your feet. Now neuropathy, you might go, neuropathy is not one of these things that you just go, okay, it's here today and gone tomorrow. It's one of those things that's pretty permanent. It can get a little bit better, but it's never going to go away. So it's one of those things you really want to prevent. The next zone is a 5.9 to 7.0. That's a moderate risk blood sugar. And that will still increase your risk of heart attack and stroke. It decreases your mental energy and stamina and sharpness. It increases your risk of circulatory issues and some Alzheimer's disease. Also, we notice that in that zone you have an increased risk of joint and abdominal pain and respiratory infections. If your blood sugars are not in control, your immune system is not working well. So you are at a much higher risk of And then if you can keep your blood sugar below 5.8, that's a healthy zone, and you see an improved cardiovascular function, immune system, you have better energy, better mood, better stamina, and just an overall better improved well-being. So, high blood sugar, like we talked about, is really more dangerous than we think. And damage can be caused by high blood sugar in your body up to 10 years before it's diagnosed. A lot of people run around with pre-diabetes for many, many years before they might get diagnosed as diabetic. And, you know, I had a cousin that was the same thing. He was pre-diabetic. I don't know how long he was pre-diabetic, but he lives in Seattle, went to the doctor, and the nurse or the medical assistant forgot to call him and tell him, hey, I got your number back when you were pre-diabetic. So then it was, probably about another year and a half before he went for his next physical, and actually he went in because he thought he was having a heart attack. But long story short, the doctor said, no, you don't have a heart attack, but you do have diabetes. And he was 42. And so his blood sugar, it's taken a bit to get it down because, you know, it was going on and, you know, pretty out of control for probably quite a few months before he found out that he had diabetes. And he really wasn't having any of the other symptoms as well. So diabetes drugs do not really stop the progression of diabetes. It just kind of temporarily slows down that cascade of health effects. So like I talked about, you still may have an amputation or a heart attack or a stroke. It just might not happen as quickly as you think. And that's why it's so important that we combine as many tools as we can to help slow down and maybe even stop or reverse diabetes. And it also does sicken your whole, you know, blood runs through everything from our brain to our toes, to our fingers, to our heart, our kidneys. So when your blood sugar's high, it's affecting everything in our body. Talk a little bit about insulin resistance so you kind of have a better idea of what's going on in the body when we are insulin resistant. Insulin is a hormone, and it allows the glucose to be taken up from the blood into the muscle cell, or whatever cell is using it. But when resistance occurs, our body becomes less effective in taking that glucose out of the bloodstream. And so when it stays in there, it stays in the bloodstream instead of going to a location where it can be burned for energy or stored, you know, either as glycogen or fat. I'm kind of a visual learner, and I like this picture because it really kind of showed me a little bit better what was going on. So you'll notice that the glucose in the blue and insulin's in the yellow, and that they always partner up when they leave the bloodstream. Your insulin is your doorman, so it's opening the door for your glucose all the time when it goes to the cell. And I don't know how many insulin receptor sites are on a cell, but we're going to just use the number 10. So let's say there's 10 actual sites on a healthy cell. And so that's pretty good. We've got 10 sites, you know, our insulin's opening the door for our glucose is entering. But when we start to develop pre-diabetes and diabetes, we become insulin resistant. So there's not as many doors that are going to open. And a lot of that has to do with the fat in the cell. So what you're going to find is that maybe there's only going to be 3 doors that open. And so only 3 pairs can leave the bloodstream. And you'll notice then how much more sugar stays in the whole bloodstream. And that's why those numbers are going up. And that's, you know, basically our visual of our insulin resistance. So why are the numbers of diabetic individuals increasing? Well, the first part is diet. I'll go more into this too. The second is obesity, because we are becoming a big, heavier society, lack of exercise, and then our environmental factors. Now, I gave you a few of those environmental factors earlier when we talked about the phthalates and that type of thing, but there's also other types of environmental factors, pollutants, BPAs, things like that. BPAs, you know, come from our plastics, our water bottles, our cans. But you have to wonder, why is the level of diabetes increasing in India? Do you think there's McDonald's on every corner? It's pollution. It's pollution that's increasing. So there are many factors. There's some that are definitely in our control, and there's a few that are out of our control. So those are the things that mainly are increasing our cases of diabetes. The first diet one is a shift in food supply to inexpensive, high carbohydrate foods. And in one of my classes at college, we did a grocery store tour, and you walk into a grocery store and you look. And if you're there just to kind of observe versus shop, kind of on your mission to get your groceries, and you look at just what is advertised, what is the first things that you see when you walk into a grocery store, and I applaud the Super One because they've kind of changed that out now, and they put more nutritional foods you walk in. But most of the time it's like chips, cookies, cereals, really quick snack carbohydrate items that are inexpensive, they're easily available, and they're tempting. And if you look at the end caps on the end of each aisle, there is never a nutritional product on those end caps. They're always junk food. So it's kind of interesting to just go in and observe your grocery store. The second one is availability of food and portion. We have an abundance of food. We throw away and consume more food than people really should. But, our portion sizes, we don't have that many young people in here, but if you look at what is a small drink today, that was a large drink back in the days when we were younger. Now the large are just like, that should be for a family. So most portions are just way oversized, and when you go out to eat, it's not a portion, it's 2 to 5 portions, and we often eat the whole thing. So we really, our portion sizes and the types of foods we're eating has really done a number on our obesity and our diabetes. Our fast-paced and sedentary life. I mean, people are running and going, and I know, my life has been crazy as a mom and, an employee, a coach, a volunteer. You're always going. And it's really easy for people to just go, hey, I'm going through McDonald's tonight, or I'm running by Burger King, or I'm ordering pizza, instead of actually planning and preparing a meal. And so we have, unfortunately, chosen a lot of the bad foods for ourselves and for our families. The other thing is, too, this high stress. Stress is a big risk factor for diabetes. And if we are constantly under stress, stress plays a big role on increasing those blood sugars. And then, of course, we don't get out and exercise like we should. Mindless eating. I don't know if anybody else is guilty of this, but if you've ever sat down in front of a TV or a computer or a movie or studying and just ate and not really thought about what you were eating, that would be considered mindless eating. And I'm sure all of us have done it at some point. I mean, I've even stood in my kitchen and talked and mindlessly ate, because we get consumed with other things we're doing and we really don't realize how much we're consuming. But Americans typically consume about 600 calories more per day than they did in 1974, and a lot of that has to do with just mindless eating. Some of these specific dietary practices, again, are processed foods. Anytime we're processing foods, we're removing so many of the nutrients. And processed foods are made out of white flour and white sugar, and there's very little fiber left in there. And that would be, our sugars and the carbohydrate type foods. Trans fats. How many of you watch labels for trans fats? A few. Okay, trans fats is probably one of the biggest causes of diabetes. And you go, trans fats unfortunately became so popular because they wanted longer shelf life for everything. So why can Twinkies last like 6 years? Trans fats. So anyway, you have to look at these things. Trans fats are found in everything from hamburgers and of course French fries, because anything deep fat fried will have trans fats, to salad dressings, margarine, cookies, crackers, cake, anything has trans fats. And trans fats are probably what is responsible for plugging up those little cells so those little doors won't open and letting the glucose, the insulin and glucose combinations in. Portion sizes and calories, we just talked about. Lack of nutrients from fruits and vegetables. When I ask people, and there's been a lot of studies on this too, but you ask people, how many fruits and vegetables do you eat a day? What do you think the typical answer is? 0? What else?
1.
1. Yeah, I don't know, they tell me 1 just so they can tell me they ate something. It might be 0, I don't know. But when we look at that, when we're not eating the good antioxidants and the vitamins and the minerals and the fiber, especially from fruits and vegetables, you can guarantee that that person is going to go down the road of some type enough fruits and vegetables. And really, you know, the big push is at least 5 a day, 5 to 11 a day. So, and make sure it's not all fruit, you know, get those veggies in there. And then lack of healthy fats. We went through the 1980s and 1990s, you know, the early 2000s, if everything had to be low fat. Well, unfortunately, when everything went low fat, we went high carb and high sugar. And we replaced a lot of the fat with sugar to make it taste better. And so now what we're finding is that we're really almost like healthy fat deficient. We really need to be increasing our fats, but increasing the right kinds of fats, not our saturated and our trans fats, but our healthy, monounsaturated fats or polyunsaturated fats. So our olive oil, our avocados, our nuts, even our fish, those type of things. And then obesity and overweight. Okay, what's really responsible for our diabetes is our belly fat. It's this fat that's around our waist. And if men have a measurement of over 40 inches and women have a measurement of over 35 inches, they are at increased risk. And the reason is the inflammation that belly fat actually causes. So when we see this inflammation going on, that's what kind of predisposes your diabetes. And inflammation is basically the base of all of our not great diseases, like our heart disease, our strokes, our cancer, as well as our diabetes. So if you're carrying weight around your middle, that is a big risk for you for one of the 4. Lack of exercise. How many of you actually have an exercise program that you do fairly religiously? Okay. All right. So a small portion. But lack of exercise will cause 1 in 10 premature deaths. You might kind of go, okay, 10%, not that big a deal. You're going to find it is a little bit bigger deal. But it does cause 4 major diseases, or 4 major diseases are associated with it. Heart disease, diabetes, and probably 2 of the worst cancers, breast and colon cancer. Smoking, we know smoking kills people, right? I mean, they've been preaching this at us for, what, about 40 years now? We don't know, though, that smoking and exercise are now equal in how many people they kill. Lack of exercise, excuse me. Lack of exercise and smoking. So that is a big deal. And when we look at the statistics, 1 in 3 adults and 4 out of 5 teens don't get enough activity. You know, I mean, it bothers me that our adults don't, but it really bothers me that our teenagers don't. So we need to really take a look at that too. So benefits of exercise. You know, I could give you a 40-minute lecture on that, but I'll spare you. The exercise is probably one of those things that if a doctor could give you a pill and say, this is a pill because this will solve so many of your health issues. And walking is one of the best exercises, and you don't have to have any special equipment. You can just go walk and you can do it pretty much anywhere. What is encouraged, and what I encourage in my program, and as well as the rest of the research out there, is at least 150 minutes of activity. So whether you choose to walk, or swim, or jog, or do an exercise class, or a cycling class, or whatever it might be, but 150 minutes a week. So if you want to divide it up in 5 days, which I suggest you do, because the more often we do it, the better we're doing. But some type of activity that's going to increase that heart rate will definitely decrease your risk of heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. And then resistive exercise. How many of you do some weightlifting, some resistance? That is good, because actually they say that resistive exercise has even a better effect, beneficial effect, than your walking does on diabetes, because it allows those cells, it forces those cells to use glucose, and it actually helps open those doors better, so it decreases that insulin resistance. So resistive exercise is really what you need to incorporate into your program as well. The other thing is I'm big into resistance exercise because, well, I do a lot of counseling with women too. And we know that even as we age, each year we're losing muscle mass, gone are our 20s. And so every year after that, we're going to be losing probably 3/4 to a pound of muscle a year, depending on what's going on in your life and with your hormones and health and that type of thing. So if you want to maintain your muscle mass, you need to be doing some resistive exercise. And it also will help improve or maintain your bone density, and that's the only thing. Our bones get weaker every year. Some men think, oh, osteoporosis? I don't have to worry about that. When I was in cardiac rehab, many of my men had osteoporosis. So women, it's more talked about, but men get it too. So it's really important that we do that resistive exercise for our muscles, for our metabolism, and our bones. Just kind of a food for thought if you go, if every 10 years I was losing 7, 8 pounds, 10 years ago, what did I weigh? Did I weigh 7, 8 pounds less? Or am I weighing more? Because you've lost that muscle mass. So either you've replaced it with body fat, or, so food for thought. Think back about 10 years ago and see where your weight was. The diabetes prevention program, and the program I teach is called the Diabetes Free Zone. And it's not the prevention program, but it's based upon this study. And this study was a National Institute of Health study. And it was done several years ago. And basically, this study took a look at two groups. They wanted to see, they took a fairly good-sized population. They wanted to see if people with prediabetes could be stopped. They wouldn't enter that diabetic zone. So we're going to keep them at prediabetes or better. And so they took two groups. They put one group on glucophage, which is a very common diabetic medication, metformin. And then they took the other group and they put them on a diet and exercise program. And the diet and exercise program actually ended up losing about 7% of their body weight. And the medication group, their little, how much medication they had is they had about 850 milligrams twice a day of metformin. But they were not given any instruction on diet and exercise. So the results of this program is our diet and exercise, our lifestyle intervention group, reduced our risk of developing diabetes from getting into that diabetic zone by about 58%. This is what I love, is this statistic right here. 60-year-old and older decreased it by 71%. So that shows that just because you're older, this will work even better. You know, you're not too old to have the benefits of good diet and exercise. The metformin group decreased their risk by 31%. So we had almost twice as better results in the diet and exercise group as they did in the metformin group, -3%. So they stopped it 1 year early so they could let everybody participate in the diet and exercise program. So right there, metformin, I don't know how many of you are on metformin, but it shows it is not going to stop the progression of this disease. Your diet and exercise will. And then other lifestyle modification studies have shown about a 93% success rate at actually reversing type 2 diabetes. And you kind of go, how come I wasn't told this? Here was a report in the 2010 Lancet journal, which is a medical journal that's read by physicians. And I like to read this and kind of diagnose or break it down. Because type 2 diabetes is rooted in reversible lifestyle factors. A medical approach alone is unlikely to be the solution. So they're saying type 2 is really rooted or caused by lifestyle. So giving them medicine alone is not going to be the solution. So they need to really think about how can we add in the other solutions here. And medicine might be winning the battle of glucose control, but it's losing the war against diabetes. And as you can see, the increase in population, it is. So the diabetes-free zone that I teach is a system that was created by a physician who actually worked on a couple of these National Institute of Health studies. And its focus is on diet, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, exercise, stress management, and structure and planning. And the structure and planning is how can we structure our life and plan our food and our meals to be successful? And then support, gaining support from the instructor and the rest of the participants. So the goals of the program are weight loss, reducing our A1C to about 5.9 or lower, reduce or eliminate the need for diabetic medication, and establish new habits and restore the body's healing process. Because remember, when we have diabetes, we don't heal as well, and our immune system are not as good. So the basis of this program is based on the Mediterranean diet, and this is a modified Mediterranean diet. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. But the Mediterranean diet has been one of those diets. It's just kind of an eating plan that has been touted to really help all different types of disease. It's a lower carbohydrate. They use very much whole foods, 5 fruits and vegetables at least a day, protein, and fiber. And some of the benefits of the Mediterranean diet is, number one, is it reduces inflammation. And remember I said inflammation is the basis of our disease, of not only diabetes, but of cancer, of heart disease, arthritis, sometimes even autoimmune disease. It's all inflammation. So we decrease a lot of the risks of those diseases when we eat this way. It also helps increase our longevity and healthy living. It prevents depression. Here's a big one, aids in preventing Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. So just eating this way is going to help reduce your risk of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And here's the, this kind of washes it out, and I'm sorry, it doesn't look this way on my screen, but the Mediterranean diet pyramid, if you can kind of tell, Mediterranean diet came from the population in Greece and Italy and kind of the whole Mediterranean area. And in that population, their culture, they're very active. They walk, I'm sure they all don't have cars and drive from here to there and like we do. But they're very active. They do a lot of dancing, they do a lot of walking and activity and playing games. So the foundation of this pyramid, as you remember from the food pyramid that we used to have, is the bottom is the most, and then it works its way up. The next group is the foods, and that would be your fruits, your vegetables, your whole grains, your oil, those really healthy, beautiful, looks so beautiful there, bright colored foods. The next one is your fish and seafood. If you're not a big fish and seafood person, I really recommend that you also use a supplement to get enough omegas, because that's probably one of the deficiencies you have in your diet. Just off to that side, you cannot even see it says drink water. And what I find is people who are not drinking enough water are also, for some reason, at a higher risk for some of these metabolic illnesses. So make sure that you're drinking enough good, healthy water. How much water should you be drinking?
100 ounces.
8. Okay. And that's at least what we should be drinking. One of the easiest way to figure out how much you probably should be drinking is take your body weight, divide it in half, and that's how many ounces. So if I was 150 pounds, because I like round numbers, I would take 150 divided by 2, gives me 75 ounces. That'd be about 9 glasses a day. So that's just a quick little rule of thumb. But I'll be honest, most of our population is dehydrated. We're running around very dehydrated, and when we look at all the problems, I just did a whole thing on dehydration, when you look at all the problems with dehydration, it really affects our brain. Our brain needs water. And you think back to a day when maybe you were dehydrated, what happens? Headache. Your head is already telling you, oh my gosh, I don't have enough hydration here. I need some water. And when you get to that point, you're really dehydrated. But your brain can't function if you don't have enough water, and the rest of your body can't function either. So if there's nothing else you walk out of here tonight with, is remember to carry your water bottle and to drink, enough water. So just above the water is our dairy section, eggs, cheese, milk, chicken, poultry, and at the very top in the little itty bitty triangle is our sugars and our red meat. And I know for our population that's really hard to see it up there because that's not what we're used to eating. We're used to eating sugars and red meat down here in the big zone. But we really have to think about reducing those and eating the healthier whole grain foods. The other thing that the Mediterranean diet does is it uses about 5 to 6 smaller meals. So you're balancing out your calories throughout your day. And we do that with our program. We do 3 meals, 3 snacks, so that you have kind of that balance through your days. And we also, in there, I don't know if you can see, there's like legumes and nuts and things like that in that big section. That's really important as well. So some of the supplements that I suggest too, the first ones are going to be your fish oil or omegas. And I'll be honest, most of us are probably very deficient in this. Fish isn't that abundant here. It's fairly expensive. It's one of those things, a lot of people just maybe don't like what they get here. But fish oil and omegas is really important, so make sure you get some of that. And your vitamin D's, vitamin D3. So if you're not taking a vitamin D3 supplement, these gals can fix you up with a good one. And it's important. I take a new one actually that has vitamin K2 and D3. It's supposed to be better for the absorption, also a little bit better for us women and men and our bones. So those are important supplements to take. And if you don't get enough fiber from food, that's where I prefer you do it first, is from your diet. If you don't get enough fiber from your food, a fiber supplement will also help control your glucose and stabilize that quite a bit too. So a little bit more about this program. We do weekly meetings, and with that, we have a lot of encouragement and support. I always ask people, you know, what's been the best outcome this week? And I'll have people, and one of the sheets I have there, it was the yellow one, has some of the, and you probably read this if you got my email. If you did not get an email from me, these were on there. But it's some of the success stories. And I had a gal, Susan, who was in my morning class. Within 3 weeks, she was able to eliminate her insulin. Granted, not everybody can do that, but she was, with her diet and how she had progressed, was able to do that. I have other people who have been diabetic for 10 or 12 years who have cut their insulin in half by now. I've had people lose, you know, anywhere from probably 12 pounds up to almost 40 pounds now. So it's really been exciting to see, and I really encourage, you know, that's the neat part, is having that support, having that encouragement. We use a lot of practical techniques. We do a lot of label reading, nutrition education, foods. You know, we talk about recipes. We bring in recipes. We bring in different samples. Because if it's something you haven't tried, it's really easy for me to give you a recipe, but you go, I don't know how that's going to taste. I don't know if I want to try it. So I bring in a little bit, and you go, wow, that's really good. I'm going to go home tonight and make that. We use good reference materials. We've got this guide, and we lay out the foods for you. So it's so simple to use. We give you here's what you have for breakfast. There can come in 15-day groupings of breakfast, lunch, dinners, and snacks, mix and match, recipes, shopping lists, and then there's, of course, guidance from myself and others in the group, too. So we provide websites, recipes, articles, and you know, type of form. But what does diabetes cost, and what does diabetes cost you? Well, the first thing you know is diabetes can cost you your life. But back to that, let's go back to dollars. Consumer Report did an article on the cost, out-of-pocket cost of diabetes. And we all have different insurance, we all have different coverage, but what we know is that costs are going up. And whatever we pay today, you're pretty much going to be guaranteed we're going to be paying probably more tomorrow for whatever medical service we're going to be getting. So the average out-of-pocket cost of diabetes is about $6,000. And I just had picked up an article just today, and it was the cost of diabetes care in the U.S. keeps climbing. It was the one where it gave me that statistic. And this said the total per person health costs among women and men, I think it was women paid about $8,331, and I don't know if it gave the men's cost. They gave them whites $8,001, blacks $9,540. So it's a lot of money out of pocket. So what we need to do is to help stop the risk of the heart disease, the kidney disease, amputation, and blindness, and to take charge of our diabetes. So where do we go from here? Well, we have classes. I currently teach Monday evening at Silver Lake Mall in the community room, and Tuesday morning here. So if you're interested in a class or interested in more about the 16-week program, please stay after. It's very similar in the design of a Weight Watchers type program where we have the weekly meetings, we have the weekly education, and we provide nutritional information. And then I also noted the costs are at $79 per month if you pay month by month, or if you pay performance, it's $71.95. And then if you pay for 6, I think it's less than that. So anyway, I have a couple people from my class, and I thought, Mike, do you want to say, he has a couple little testimonials, and I thought maybe you'd like to give a quick little blurb.
Well, I would like to say to anybody that's here, if you have diabetes or you think you need to learn more about this, this is the gal right here. I'm here to tell you, I have diabetes. And I went, because of my insurance, where some of those of you who have diabetes, in order to be covered by diabetes, you have to go to a diabetes class, which I did. And it was, I think it was about 6 classes once a month for 6 months. I went to the class and I learned a lot. I learned a lot about what to do and what not to do. And then I started, you know, that went away. And maybe about within a year or so, all of a sudden my diabetes just started getting out of hand. And I just happened to stumble onto Lynn. She was over at that thing over at Silver Lake Mall. And I seen she had a sign there, and I looked in there, and they was having class. So I called her, and I said, Lynn, my diabetes is going the wrong direction. I mean, it was going up, and I didn't know what to do. And I had increased my metformin, and they're still going up. So I went over to her class. I subscribed. I got signed up and so forth, and I've been there for about 4 months. And my diabetes has gone down, my blood sugar has gone down by 30%. I've reduced my insulin, or my metformin, my medicine by about 30%. And it's like, man alive, I feel a lot better. And the only thing I'm disappointed about is she doesn't charge enough. This gal, if you're even think you're interested in what she has to say, this is the only gal around. Right here. So take your opportunity, get signed up. She did not pay me to talk. I go to her class once a week, and I've been doing it for about 4 months. And I'm telling you, I'm so happy. And everybody in the class, there's nobody in her class who hasn't had the exact same results, if not better, than what I'm describing right here. So this is the place. Take advantage of it. Don't let it slip away.
Well, thank you, Mike.
You bet.
You never know what you're going to get when you Anyway, and I would like to answer questions, because I know you probably have some questions, you know, about diabetes or blood sugar or the class or, you know, different things. Yes? That's right.
I was listening to a cook program. I was preparing meat. And he said that it's not okay to cut all the fat out of meat. He said you just leave about 10–15% because this is the good stuff.
You know, there's been more research out that actually shows maybe we should be drinking 2% milk instead of skim milk, or having a little bit more animal fat. So he's probably correct in that. You know, like I said, we've gone so fat-free for so long, and we need a certain amount of fat for our hormones, for our cholesterol, for, you know, all the different things in our body. So that is probably true. Yeah. Any other questions? I don't know. Yes.
If we
no.
sign up, Lynn, can we alternate between, like, we can't make
Yes.
the Monday, we can
Can come
flip
on
over to the
Tuesday.
Tuesday?
I
yeah.
have people that kind of do
Okay.
that. Yep, yep. No, you're definitely not locked in, and we teach you to make out,
Susan.
and I know where to find you.
Okay, bye-bye, thank you.
You're welcome. We have people that, you know, oftentimes in life, you know, has different things going on, and, you know, if we have enough, big enough group and we need another time, I'm definitely open to creating another time as well. So, it's just based on the numbers. Right now, I think we have somewhere between 15 and 17 that come in my evening class, and we have, you know, 3 to 5 that come in morning class, just kind of rotate. So, and I teach the same thing both days. So whatever class you're coming to, you get the same information.
How long do classes last?
They're about 50 minutes, yeah. So right in there. Again, it depends on how many success stories that you may share. But no, they're good. And yeah,
Oh, I've heard different ways of where you should measure your waist. I've heard
Right.
some people say, measure it at the belly button, and others say, you know, at your natural smallest waist part.
what we're typically taught is the umbilicus, the belly button. But, you know, take a couple measurements, and when
Yeah,
I
because
do.
there's like about a 3 to 4 different
Exactly.
inch difference.
And what you'll notice at different parts of your waist, you're gonna decrease different amounts. When we were doing some biometric screening last year at the college, I think we did it in 2 different places. So it's okay, oh, maybe that was 2 years ago when we ran our study. It's okay, you know, some people carry more upper, some people carry more lower. So take 2 or 3 measurements, but just kind of remember, you know, you might use either your hip bone or your belly button as a reference point and know, like, I'm 2 inches down, 2 inches above, and right on.
So
Yeah.
when they say
So-
35 inches, that can make a big difference.
Yeah.
Whether it's measured at the belly button or
Right.
my natural waistline is a little about 2 inches higher than that.
Yeah. You might take it at your belly button to start with and kind of see how you are in that. Yeah. Okay, any other questions? You guys have been a great audience, and I know that there was a couple questions regarding type 1. And type 1 and type 2 do vary, and what we are seeing is both type 1 and type 2 are both on the increase. Type 1, you know, we used to say was juvenile diabetes, or you can only get it when you're a kid, which isn't true either. But it is, the risk factors for that, heredity, virus. We think that the flu virus, or a type of flu virus, is when it's in and attacks people's pancreas, because most people end up with flu-like symptoms, and all of a sudden they have these other symptoms which turn out to be diabetes and their pancreas isn't working. The other thing could be hereditary. Did I say that too? So hereditary, virus, environmental. That was the third one. And with that, you know, the same thing is your pancreas isn't working, but you can get to where in type 2 your pancreas doesn't work too. So even though you might be adult onset, more lifestyle, you can end up with a pancreas function that really doesn't function anymore. So, and they are definitely more insulin dependent, but what you can still do is use a lot of the same dietary principles. Reducing the simple processed carbohydrates completely out of your diet, staying more with your fruits and vegetables, balancing everything with protein, carbohydrates, fiber. Those are the keys to keeping those blood sugars stable. So it's really important. And again, your vitamin D, I just read a study that said low vitamin D may be a big risk factor, a big cause for type 1 right now. And we know that if you have a low vitamin D level in your body, that you are more susceptible to respiratory infections and colds and things like that. So really, knowing your vitamin D and having a good vitamin D level is just critical for your health. So that might be another. Did you have any more questions? Not necessarily. Okay. I know it's 2 different entities, but they are similar, you know, in how we can balance things out. All right. Well, yeah.
Have you taken a look at the studies that link diabetes to chromium and vanadium deficiency in people?
You know, there is some thought on that whole chromium and helping balance the blood sugars. So, and magnesium. Magnesium is another one that we're often deficient in as well. And so that may play a part in all of this too. So there is definitely some thought in nutrient deficiencies, and if not causing, you know, it might really throw you over if those deficiencies are there, yes. Yeah. So it's not just simple, it's very complex, and every one is a little bit different. But there's a lot to think about in our nutrition, because if we don't have good nutrient levels in our body, we definitely are much higher risk for these type of illnesses and diseases. So it's not just weight and exercise, you know.
What are your ideas on cooking oils? Which ones do you list as good and which ones do you say stay away?
That's a good, very good question. We do go over that. I usually bring in samples. I use coconut oil as my high heat oil. I use my olive oil, either low or no heat oil. I use grapeseed oil.
I've heard that one is bad.
You've heard that one's bad now? Flax, there's a flax oil as well that I'll use.
You cook with that?
You can use, yes, flax oil. It's a low heat,
Low heat.
yeah,
Oh.
oil. So,
What about how do you feel about
no
canola
oil. You know, it's gone down in its rating in my world. So So I don't use much canola oil at any, and I use butter. Yeah. So, anyway, those are the oils that I use. I definitely stay away from your corn oil, your soybean oil, your vegetable oil, canola oil I don't choose anymore. You can melt your coconut oil and use it in place of something you might use with typically
Yeah, you
canola
can
oil.
even bake with the diabetes.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, what's that?
Makes yummy chocolate.
Oh.
I found recipes where chocolate can be baked with coconut oil, cocoa powder, and ice.
Uh-huh.
Really nice.
It's really good, like chocolate ball type thing.
Well, I
Or
put
bars.
it in, I actually put it in an ice cream tray. With little tiny square.
Well, and the cocoa is, it's good for you. So it has some great antioxidants, so, yes.
Those oils,
What's okay?
those oils you just talked about, can you just pick one, like olive oil, so you don't have a whole cupboard full of oil?
That's a good question. The thing with olive oil, and back several years ago, before I kind of figured out the whole temperature thing in the oils, I used more olive oil for everything. But the problem is, olive oil heated past medium heat, medium to high heat, will hydrogenate. So you can take a good oil and turn it bad. So you want to have at least two oils, a low temperature cooking oil and a higher temperature cooking oil.
What's your high temperature?
I use the